It's not if, it will have to be rebuilt at some point.
So refreshing to see a candidate come in with a bold policy initiative.
The worst that is going to happen. A child's going to get educated.
What we would probably call cuddly capitalism.
You get to build your community and you have your village.
I don't have any more money to give you.
Free-hugging, hippie liberal Democrat.
I'm so sorry. I'll see myself out.
Welcome back to Strangers Talking Politics. I'm Alli.
I'm Bethany.
And I'm Jesse.
Today we are joined by Russell and Leigh. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you would like to introduce yourselves to our listeners, that would be great.
Yes, Cleveland, running for Congress here in U.S. House, Montana District 1. I'm a Montanan, U.S. Navy veteran, dad of 7, former businessman. I ran a childcare company for the last decade, so just excited to be here representing Montana.
Well, howdy, folks. My name is Leigh Larson. I'm here in Great Falls. I'm an Air Force veteran. I served in the Chaplain Candidate Program, Chaplain Candidate Corps. I am web and graphic designer by income. That's what keeps the roof over my head, but I mainly focus on history, theology, specifically history of women's history and Indigenous history. And I am excited to be here. Thank you so much. I have published a few articles and grown, and I'm talking too much. I'm sorry. Howdy. Thank you for having me. My name is Leigh.
Thank you guys both so much. That is wonderful. And our listeners will get to know you as we go. So this is perfect. Russell, you had said that you wanted to talk about universal childcare. So I'll let you have the floor with that one.
Yeah. So a little bit about my background. I worked in a couple different areas before moving to Colorado, and finance had brought me down to Colorado. Part of my role in working in finance down there was kind of business prospecting. So getting out in the community again, speaking of community, talking to businesses and figuring out where their needs were. And these are mostly small businesses, $2.5 million in sales or less. And one of my clients was a childcare company, and I became great friends with the COO, and they were kind of sunsetting. That organization was getting ready to close. And so I had just found it super interesting. If you've read my bio, you realize my wife and I have our more than enough for a basketball team, plus a few bench players. But the point is, we started Rocky Mountain Kids shortly after that. That company closed, and that gentleman and I became business partners. And 4 years later, COVID hit. And so we were kind of on our own in the beginning, much like most child care centers. So we did primarily before and after school care. Then we morphed into summer camps, enrichment programs. And March 13th, 2020 came around, and the world shut down, as you guys probably recall. And at that point, I think we were roughly 130, 140 employees, and then we were over 20 locations. So there were a lot of concerned employees like, hey, am I going to have a job? Equally, parents are like, hey, schools are closed. I have to have a place to send my kids. What's going to happen? And so everyone was kind of tapping that panic button. And luckily, Colorado was positioned in a way I was able to work with an organization called Gary Community Ventures, and it was a philanthropic organization. Mike Johnston was the CEO. He's now the mayor of Denver. Awesome guy. And their organization worked with us and Governor Polis down there and opened these remote learning centers within a week. So it took us 10 days to get back open, including the weekends. So there was only 1 work week of stand down there, and basically created this model where kids could learn with social distancing virtually, but it's kind of funky. You think about it. It's like we were in person, but kids were 6 feet apart on their computers at all attending different schools. So very cool idea. It worked really well. It obviously exploded. And then that model became used all over Colorado and the rest of the country. And not even 6 months later, we started seeing government funding coming in to support, this model, to support students in this environment, so subsidizing the childcare. And typically our population, so we served about 9,000 families, and about 30% of those were already on a subsidy of some kind, whether that be, low income or what have you. That Colorado calls it CCAP. It's basically a child care assistance program. But this was on top of that, and it basically made this child care free for almost all families. Attendance went through the roof. Obviously the learning curve corrected, and we still see now a lot of COVID learning loss in those 3rd to 5th graders that were hit during that time frame. They're still behind on the metrics. The point I'm making is there was an opportunity realized there. I think that there's this idea of how connected childcare is to the rest of the economy. Everybody realized pretty quick that doctors can't work, police can't work, paramedics, any essential worker, teachers, you name it, if they have children at home and nowhere to send them, no safe place to send them. And so one of the foundational blocks is childcare. And we're in this time where, half the country really wants to alienate ourselves from, producing anything overseas and importing it. And the other half is like, think that's a great idea. But in either case, whether we're going to ramp up our workforce and production and those sort of things, or whether we're going to continue down this path of being highly virtual and a more technical society. I don't know if any of you have kids, but I do. And working remotely from home with kids at home is just as impossible as working in an office with them, especially if they're young. So I think there's a huge opportunity here in this idea called universal childcare. And what that is, if I can just frame it quickly for you, then you guys can tear it apart, but it would encapsulate basically everything from birth up through middle school. And so what that would look like is building in a 0 to 1 age where we as a country are providing paid maternity leave, so that parent or parents could potentially use what would be compensated to a child care center for their child in place of, maternity leave and stay at home with their baby. Or if they chose to go back at work at any point in that first 12 months for infant child care, which I'm sure you guys know is crazy expensive, then it would compensate for that, but not both. And then you have this period of 12 to 36 months, which is kind of a pre-K, but what we're seeing in most studies, it's a huge opportunity to set kids up for success in their learning journey with even tactile learning and things like that. So it would be giving parents an opportunity to get back to work without that cost, which I'll tell you is oftentimes more than a mortgage payment per child, and having that care paid for. That would immerse into a pre-K in that 36 to 5 range. And really what that does is, from a federal level, standardizes what many states have already done, which is this idea of universal pre-K. It's a full day program, and it really helps kids start with some of the early childhood development. And then it goes into a support system for school age up through middle school, which is that before and after school care and supplemental care for things like summer camps and times where school breaks are in session. So if I had to pair the two, it would be looking at it as marrying it with education. We talked about how education is severely underfunded, and I think there's an opportunity to build off of a model like this. One benefit I see to the Department of Education being potentially torn down by the Trump administration is when it is rebuilt, because it's not if, it will have to be rebuilt at some point. Can we rebuild it in a way that makes sense for 2026 or 2027, a modern era that encapsulates what we're really doing as a workforce now? And so I think there's a huge opportunity there to build this program that helps, parents early on. And obviously $5,000 ain't going to cut it, right? We've seen that you're not going to encourage parents to have more kids with a $5,000 check or a medal to have 6 kids. But I think you could encourage people to say, hey, I would have more kids if I could afford it. And one of those big costs is childcare. And so if you built it on a sliding scale to where a lower income family had a full compensation of that. So if you're making $15 or $20 an hour, you can still send your kid to a quality care center, a licensed facility that they're in good hands, and not have to worry about paying your whole check towards childcare, and slide it versus, if you're making $250,000 a year, maybe you don't have any support. But I think there's an opportunity in the middle ground there for our middle class and lower class to have support that really encourages them to re-enter the workforce.
If you end up with a primary opponent or get through the primary to the general, I'm sure you'll have plenty of people trying to tear that policy apart. But just for now, it's so refreshing to see a candidate come in with a bold policy initiative, and one that is so far-reaching. My oldest daughter, she's in her early 20s now, but she was a teen mom. And I'm lucky to be in a position with my company that I was able to change my work situation and work from home for that first year so she could graduate from high school. So many people, so many teen mothers don't have something like that going on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question, and by no means do I believe this, but I know this is a question that people who will oppose it will ask. What about the people who are going to take advantage of it?
Well, I think you have to build in some safeguards, right? I think if you're going to utilize a social program like this, I think you have to have or be seeking at least gainful employment. There are people that would, we can pretend it doesn't happen, but there are people I think that would try and take advantage of not working and sending their kids off to a paid subsidy like this. But I think the smart thing would be to obviously have that proof of unemployment as a qualifier. And that's pretty common already. So just telling you that, being in that industry, these other, like the CCAP program that I told you about, they have, basically apply and improve their packet. And some of them have a copay, like it's a parental amount that they pay towards it every month. But so I don't think it's reinventing the wheel. It's modifying it to serve the greater American public in a way that makes sense for, a sustainable and successful workforce.
Well, and isn't it frustrating that you get that pushback? Because you're right, you'll see it, but nobody ever says, what if they take advantage of public schools, or what if they take advantage of the post office,
To your point, totally. I'm glad that you guys are much smoother in your response, because I would be like, so what? What's the worst that is going to happen? A child's going to get educated and be better off in life? Oh, darn. Shit. What are we going to do?
Well, I'll tell you, the biggest part of our business was in Aurora, Colorado. And, many of those communities are very low demographic when it comes to, socioeconomic status. And that was the actual approach, was like, this isn't a benefit for the parents. It's a benefit for the kids, because they had a mill levy passed there that covered cost of aftercare. And the goal was to get kids off the street after school till they have a safe space, to go to for those few hours and aren't walking home in the dark in the middle of winter in Aurora, Colorado. So that, just as a comparison, so that one of the locations before the mill levy there, we had on average, 4 or 5 kids attending. And as soon as that mill levy was passed, we were maxed at our licensing capacity, which was 100 kids an afternoon. You're talking about a massive difference in attendance just by having that subsidy available. And sure, yeah, are people taking advantage of it? But at the end of the day, it goes back to, what do we want from our future generation? And are we setting them up for success? And, as a first world country, if you want future workers and contributors and stable workforce and people paying into Social Security and you name it, we have to take better care of them when they're young.
I want to add, I had the opportunity to travel to Sweden last summer, and I was there for a while and was amazed at their social infrastructure. I mean, just floored by it. And there is a common theme that Sweden is entirely socialist. It's not. It's a hybrid blend of what we would probably call cuddly capitalism. Where there's the tax burden is predominantly on the middle class, the working class. And a lot of that was in response when they tried to go full socialist. They drove out a lot of their companies, wealth flight, capital flight, whatever you want to call that. But what's so interesting is in these social programs is the amount of relief that everyone feels, because you're absolutely right. Like, it's like, what's the worst that it could happen, like with subsidizing daycare, with childcare or education or schools or any of these things? The individual or the household in such a happier mood, lifestyle, but they also feel so much more connected. Everyone is sharing in the burden of community. Everyone is a part of this thing. And it's something that I feel like when I hear about school vouchers, I just went through in Texas, like I was like, but we're all, we pay public school taxes because we're all going towards public school teachers. We're going towards a collective of the next generation. You brought up the next generation earlier, being educated. And I'm not looking to take that out and put it into a different source. I want all of us in this together. And no one is exempt from this. And this idea that you can exempt yourself from community is incredibly individualistic, that very much that rugged individualism. I don't have to do this. I can just separate and go my own way. And I don't, but I love your idea is all that I'm trying to say. And I have seen in other places where the tax burden has fallen on the middle class to implement it, but also how it benefits like the working middle class. There's a lot of distrust and working towards trusting one another. We don't have to all be best friends and invite each other to dinners at our home, but we can send each other the same schools, pay for one another to have support.
No, I just love that. I think it doesn't require a huge shift of that tax burden. I think it's just being smarter with where we pull that money from or where we're spending our money, which takes a mentality change in resource allocation. And, again, not to drill on Department of Defense, but that's $1 trillion. And you're talking about a fraction of that could basically stand up a program like this that would, by my estimates, increase the American economy by likely 20% or greater, just by having an infrastructure like this that's set up. Because just by simply people re-entering the workforce that wouldn't be able to prior, isn't a huge financial burden. I mean, you don't know how many times I've heard, I have them in my family, working mothers that decided to stay home, working fathers that decided to stay home, that are like, it doesn't make sense for me to pay for childcare for 2 or 3 kids because my entire check would go to the cost of this childcare. So I think it's a huge opportunity. It's not socialist, like you said. It's socio-democratic, right? Like we're all contribute, just like Sweden and Switzerland. Some of these, it's a socio-democratic method that is we all pitch into the greater good, and it helps everybody in a different way. Whether that's reducing crime rates long term, whether that's reducing childhood diseases and obesity, and improving nutrition programs, whether that's increasing education levels, whether that's improving our workforce. There's a lot of opportunities there that touches a lot of different parts of the American economy that I think we're missing the buck on right now. So
yeah, really almost anything that could be considered part of our social safety net has been shown to be good for the economy. It helps grow the economy. Whether you're talking about universal child care or heck, universal health care as a small business owner, every small business owner in this country should be fully on board with universal health care. Every small business owner in the country should be excited about universal child care. I mean, that is one of the most difficult things to do as a small business owner is recruit employees. And when you're competing against the Amazons and the Googles, you don't have the same resources to offer the benefits that they do.
Well, and I think to the conversation of community that we've kind of had this undertone throughout this talk as community, I think what you said of having it from birth through middle school, I mean, I can vividly remember in middle school, that's even how my parents got friends, was my friends in middle school. And if there was a program, I grew up very poor. So it's like if we had a program that I could have gone to for free as a kid, as parents, you then become friends with the other parents there. And it's not as taxing on you because you don't have to sign your child up for hundreds and hundreds of dollars of summer camps or after school programs and buying uniforms and getting involved in sports. And then you're driving them to all, there's so much money that's involved with even just a simple like after school activity that it's like if your kids can have somewhere to go for free where they can socialize in person, they can make friends, as the parent, you also benefit from that socially by you get to build your community and you have your village and you didn't really have to do much. You just sent your kid to an after school program.
exactly.
I think that's a really great point to make. And I think we're all kind of hitting the nail on the head. The only thing that I would add on to that is that I think sometimes we get too caught in the minutia of the words, like we were talking earlier. And I think that we forget to treat these issues in a communal way. Because most of the time when we're talking about things like healthcare, we're talking about who's going to pay for it. When we're talking about things like universal childcare, we kind of focus more on the parents, I think, than we do on the totality of how that will help all of society. It's not just going to help parents pay for childcare so that they can make ends meet. That's one great benefit, and that's awesome, but that's not the only thing. It's not only going to help children develop and become well educated and, the cream of the crop as far economically and otherwise, but it's also going to help industry, because if industry helps create a pool of highly qualified and highly skilled people, guess what? They're going to have more innovation. They're going to have more creativity. They're going to have intellect beyond imagination and a whole wealthy pool of it that they have invested in. When we look at paying for these things, yes, everybody looks at the price tag. I don't understand why the price tag on something like this is like, those 3 jets that you were talking about, max, would cover this. 1 jet, I don't know. But that's what I'm talking about, is like, I think it's a great conversation to kind of let's redirect into the fact that everybody benefits from this. It is not just one person paying for somebody else's benefit. It is not just some people paying to help someone else out while they're struggling. This is one of those programs that, I say it all the time, but it's very much a rising tide raises all ships. Every investment into this is going to have a payback for literally every sector of society.
Yeah, small and big business. I think that's something to forget, right? Like, you hate to help billionaires, but this will help them too, because guess what? These massive corporations that are looking for box packers at Amazon warehouses, guess who needs childcare? Those individuals, right? People stocking shelves at Target, guess who needs childcare? Those individuals. And so I think it's workers, it's children, it's business.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the show so far and would like to be a part of the conversation, visit us at stppod.com. That's stppod.com. To hear more from our strangers, you can find them at their socials linked below in the description. Okay, enough of that. Back to the yapping you came for. So there was a post on the Missoula Reddit, as my dog freaks out in the background. Hello, Jake. He wants to be a part of the podcast. There is a big conversation going on. So this morning, somebody on Reddit had posted that there was only a 22% turnout for the voting in the schools, the ballots that we just had yesterday. There are a lot of people who are upset about it. It has been corrected to 34%. So there was a 34% turnout for voting, which is not that high. So a couple of the things that people have said were, one person posted saying that people love to protest in Missoula, but no one wants to turn out to vote, which got a lot of backlash because people were like, there was a now 34% that we know of, but they were like, if we have this big of a turnout and 34% showed up, it's probably the people who are out protesting and, you know, they're active in their community. People were talking about how they voted because they have kids in school, and that's part of the problem. There was another one, I'm trying to find it because there was somebody who made a comment about, oh yes, someone said, you should be thankful. They put school levies in May for a reason, because if it was a general election, most people would reject it. Does anybody think that's true?
You know, I don't think that's true. I think this is probably part of a bigger conversation, though. I think it's a hard timing of this one, and maybe it's just peculiar because there's been so much state legislation around property tax relief, and you know, we're coming off of this couple of years of property tax increases, and so I personally think there could be some more narrative provided around it that help people understand really what they're voting for. I know a little bit about it because my wife's on our school board, and so is my dad here in St. Regis, small town, so they take whoever is qualified and willing to help. But at the same time, they're looking at $1 million cut. St. Regis's levy did not pass, so we're looking at $1 million cut in funding. And I can tell you, for a small community like ours, that's going to absolutely devastate the school budget.
Yeah, and it looks like most of the levies failed. There are a handful that did pass, but whether it's Livingston, St. Regis,
Kalispell, I think passed, a couple others, but
one of 3 from Helena passed. And it depends on the county, but one of the things that's interesting about the levy process, especially in smaller counties, is they'll often do all mail ballots automatically, just because it's significantly more affordable for the counties not to have to set up an entirely new election office. And I would really wonder if part of the low turnout for this one would be a little bit of they don't want to vote against the schools, but because property taxes have gone up so much, they didn't feel comfortable voting for it.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I'm just looking at the school memo here. It was, in our district, was 408 ballots were returned and accepted out of 871. And so you're a little less than 50%. The people who voted for was only 150, and those against were 285. So, but, I echo kind of what you're saying. Is there enough narrative around that for people to understand what it's going to do to school districts? We're used to getting so much material pumped at us in terms of other campaigns, and, having the narrative there certainly help. I think a lot of voters understand what happens if it doesn't get passed.
Yeah, we had a conversation on the property tax increases, and a county like Granite, where they saw 64% was the average property tax rise, that's a difficult ask to say, let's put it up a little bit more.
There's also a conversation being had on the post about how for like the elections, the presidential elections, most people have time off of work, things like that. And with local elections, most places aren't going to give the employees time off to go and vote. Do you think that that's a factor? Do you think that it is something where people should have the availability to go and vote from their employers?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of being American, right? I think it's a fundamental right that you should have the opportunity to vote. And if you can't mail in a ballot, I think it's pretty critical. It's a civic duty to go and cast a vote. Now, you have the option not to as well. But I think as we saw in the last general election, I mean, there was 100,000 votes in District 1 here that were registered voters that didn't turn out. So we had 428,000 registered voters, and only 322 showed up for the Trinell-Zinke vote. And 100,000 votes is a lot that can make an election go one way or the other. So it's hard to pinpoint, what those causes might be, but it certainly makes a difference. And especially when you're talking school levies, that's a big impact on local community.
Is that really low turnout when you consider it compared to others, right? Like 34% turnout for a non-office election, a off-season election, a post super season election, to me, that seems like a lot when you put it into context that nationally only half of the eligible voters voted in the biggest election we've had in forever. So, I mean, 34% seems like a lot. And then, out in Superior, you're looking at 50% yourself. Like, I think that's comparatively good, though, yes, it could be better and it should be better. But I think comparatively, that's pretty good turnout.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Statistically, it's considered low turnout, especially in Montana, where we've been seeing on the low end 65%. And commonly, counties, even in primaries or off elections, you're getting very close to that 70% number. I mean, but it's terrible for Missoula. A rural county around 50%. I mean, that's a tough number for a community that you would expect every single person to know what's going on.
That's fair too. And then my next question would be, do we think that it's just voter fatigue? Are people just tired of politics because everything is so overwhelming and hyperbolic?
And to add on, Alli, to whether it's voter fatigue or just voter cynicism, like just feeling like darned if I do, darned if I don't. And like, I think that was a great point, Jesse. Like, you don't want to vote against the schools, but we're struggling. The average household is struggling economically and feeling like, are we being represented? Not to say, I don't know Missoula politics, but we just had a school board election in Great Falls as well. We also had a library levy that passed a few years ago, but our first responder levy did not. And now the city is looking to take away funding from the library in other ways to fund the first responders. And again, it's like, I'm not looking to be in a society where, and like the language, the narrative, this rhetoric, this like, oh, if you're pro library, you're anti police, or if you're pro first responder. And I'm like, that's not the society I want to live in. I also want to live in a society where I can breathe, and the property taxes are making that harder. And then you've got wage stagflation and inflation. And it's just, so I think that's a good point, Alli. I just wanted to add to that. Thank you.
Leigh, was that Sheriff Slaughter's speedboat levy that went down last year?
I think so. I am still, the first responder levy, the feedback that we've heard was that they asked for too much, that the taxpayers were unhappy with how much the levy asked for, and especially compared to the library. But also, first responders have a lot more expensive needs than a library: new vehicles, new armor, new weapons, new uniform. It's a whole different, you can't even really compare the two. And of course, populations are growing and first responders are struggling to keep up with responding to all the number of people. So then it becomes this whole we can't even get a hold of them anyway, or then it becomes this narrative that what we have isn't working, so we shouldn't fund it because we can't, it's like, no, that's actually the reverse is true. And it's the same even with our library. We're about to launch a large library renovation in Great Falls, raise the money through our Great Falls Public Library Foundation. And the feedback has been some of the feedback, of course, has been, the library's run down. Do we even use it? Do we even need it? And it's like, well, that's why we're raising funds to renovate the library so that more people can come, so that you can be reminded of all the services that we have for children, the elderly, language learning, cultural talks and et cetera. So point being, there is this whole narrative that when things are inadequately funded and they're inadequately answering the call to what they quote should be doing, then people start to question, should we even be funding it to begin with? And the answer is well, yes, of course, they're just not adequately being funded. So to hit the standard that you're looking for to use the services.
Well, let's put in juxtaposition now to the state surplus. The state, for the last few years, has been sitting on a whole bunch of money that could go to help these levies that are not passing in these counties that need help. And so what are the implications when we're talking about our state legislature versus county needs? The state has played a huge part in upping our property taxes to such a degree, and they're just sitting on that money, that now when our local communities need something, the taxpayer is tired. They're like, I don't have any more money to give you. Why can't we just take that from the surplus? Because isn't that kind of how it was supposed to be anyway?
Well, and there's a discourse going on that thread also of people people who are talking about, instead of raising property taxes, why aren't we adding some sort of tax to all of the dispensaries, specifically for Missoula, because that's the Reddit thread that it's on. But it's like, I mean, you can't throw a rock in Missoula without hitting a dispensary. And so people are like, how about instead of raising the property taxes, you take some of the money that they are making and put that back into the community, use it for good. There's a lot of things that I think that you guys hit a lot of different reasons why people are not turning out, and I think that they're all valid. And I think, honestly, I think you guys kind of all boil it down to the same thing, and people are just tired, whether it's they're tired because they don't have the money, whether it's tired because of the last election, whether they're tired just from voting. I think people are just exhausted.
Well, I think it's the source as well, right? You look at the hundreds of millions of dollars that were spent on just campaign finance last election to run ads and you name it. And we're talking pennies on the dollar to just support school systems, and we can't get the support for it. But I also think you're asking, I mean, we have to ask that way because that's the way the system is set up. But look at who are asking to continue to give more. I mean, people are strained for income, and, you know, Montana's on the lower end already of income, and property taxes are some of the highest in the country. Cost of living is third out of 50 states. And you want to bring, and you know, democratically, we're a party that is like, hey, taxes are for good. We can figure this out. But you have to look at it from the other side and say, hey, we're kind of taxed out, right? So are we really robbing Peter to pay Paul here? Are we asking the right people to make this difference? There's just not enough, you know, and there has to be some change there. And personally, I think these levies are going to continue to fail. We've seen it historically over the last 30, 40 years that in general in Montana, you know, my dad's been a school board member in the Brood and now out here in Mineral County for 25, 30 years, and levies are hard to get passed. I mean, people they don't want to be stuck with a higher tax burden than they have to when it comes to property tax. And I get it. It's a hard pill to swallow.
Should there be some change around the narrative of investing in the country's future? Because really that's what these levies are for. We are investing in ourselves. We're investing in our future. We're investing in our children, right? And there's not enough talk about why higher education is important, because it's not just good for those kids, right? Yes, it's great for kids to have education. That's fantastic. But it's good for us as a nation. It's good for our economy. It is good for all kinds of areas, whether it be healthcare and the things that we need. And because we made those investments back in, you know, the 50s and the 60s and so forth into our country to develop ourselves, we invested in ourselves, right? We became one of the leading countries in the world. And now that we are not willing to invest anymore, what is that going to mean for us?
Well, I think that's a great point. And it goes back to my point of, I think we're trying to support this system from the wrong area. You know, you look at the USS Truman just lost its third fighter jet, and thank God that the pilots were okay, but each fighter jet cost $68 million. And you think about 3 times 68 million, that's a lot of money that could go to public education, right? And I think it's part of a bigger conversation of why are we spending $1 trillion as a nation on our defense? And I'm a supporter of defense, but to the tune of 1 trillion, I don't know that that's necessary, right? The next biggest budget is 25% of that. China spends a quarter of what we do on defense. And so I personally, I think we have our priorities mixed up. We've gotten to a point where we're spending money in the wrong areas. The tax dollars are there. We're just allocating them wrong. And you're relying on local taxes to support a public education system with standardized measures across the nation. So we're going to test kids across the country to the same level, but we're going to try and support them from some communities which are very poor and some that are very affluent. And that those two things don't add up. I think you're disproportionately setting kids up to fail for the long term. And to your point, Allison, I think that education is linked to everything. I mean, it's linked to crime rates when these kids age out of the system. It's linked to nutrition and health rates for the long term. So it's linked to our healthcare system. So I think we have to take a step back and look at the broader system here. And it's failing right now.
I think the messaging is a lot of what I'm getting at in that particular comment, right? Is that we forget to message what we're doing. It is so important because I don't know a single person who cannot get on board with investing in their children. I don't know a single person who cannot get on board with wanting the best for the people and building things that are valuable to the people. But when we feel so disconnected from all of this money, you know, Russ, you made some great points about how much money was spent on the campaigns, how much money we just lost in 3 fighter planes alone, how much money Doge cut, and all of those amounts are pennies to the federal government. But then when you juxtapose those to what these school levies were asking for, like one of these levies in Missoula was for like $184,000. And I think that one passed, but I think the other one was like $380,000. In comparison to that, like it's not even pennies at that point. We're talking like micro money, and we can't get micro money for the basic people passed. And I think part of that is because we aren't messaging about the fact that it's investment and that we need to take this money, like you were saying, and we need to allocate it for the people instead of for the privileged.
I think that talking about messaging is kind of a perfect segue. So I'm going to segue us into Leigh's topic, which is how language is used to influence politics. I think that probably coincides with messaging. And I totally understand what that means. And I know all of the points that you're for sure about to make. But for anyone who's listening who might not be as smart as me, do you want to explain to them how language is used to influence politics?
Absolutely. Obviously, we all speak English, but it is how we're approaching different topics and the words, the buzzwords, the code words that we use to kind of figure out whether someone is an ally or an opponent. And this politicization of language is sort of kind of setting us up, at least linguistically, into different camps, different tribes, if you will. We'll do a deep dive on what I'm talking about here in a second, but in a lot of ways there's also a lot of things that we may agree on, or maybe not even agree on as far as language, but overall mission. But because we use a different language to go about that mission, it's breaking down our ability to accomplish shared goals. It's certainly one of those things, like you said, I think a lot of people know intuitively what I'm talking about, but just to call it a name, the politicization of language is really what's going on.
That's funny. When I was on the campaign trail last year, I was told I was a Democrat who knows how to speak Republican.
Yes, that's a great example. So an example I have of recent in person was that I went to a conference in Appalachia, and it was made up, the attendees were theologians, ministers, academics, and they ranged the political spectrum. And the topic specifically was on environmentalism. It was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the major dilemma that all these people across the spectrum were dealing with was the poverty of Appalachia combined with mining as a form of labor, as the primary source of labor, but also not feeling like they have a voice, not feeling like they have any power to push back against all the environmental regulations that have been repealed. So on one hand, they were thrilled to have a surge in mining investment so that they have jobs. On the other, all those environmental regulations have been rolled back, and lead, arsenic, and more metals are getting into the groundwater, affecting the fishermen, hunting, getting in the lungs, high rates of cancer and kidney infections, infertility, and other menstrual issues. And so these theologians, these clergy, and these academics were having to discuss these things. Particularly, it was interesting to hear from the clergy who do minister to congregation, who they do go to work in the mines. And on one hand, you never want to denounce someone's job because that's so much of who their identity is, their work, while also calling out, and their clergy, so in their language, the Christian-like employment practices of their employer, whether it's the inability for them to form unions or to handle the environment with Christian responsible stewardship. And the more I was sitting there listening to it, I was like, that is wild that we have a lot of similar. I have an environmental science background. That's in college. I went to Botswana for a summer and studied effects on climate change. And that's a whole other story. But I have a storied resume with environmental protection. And this year, I'm the Clean Energy Fair Coordinator for Montana Renewable Energy Association. So I'm sitting here listening to this being like, okay, so we have a shared goal, but because the clergy are now using the Bible to justify it, I know that with the progressive left, they're going to shut down the minute that they hear Bible. And they have valid reasons. I'm not denouncing that or discrediting that, but I was like, but on the other hand, if I start using things like climate change and sustainability, you're going to write me off as a tree hugging hippie liberal Democrat or something, right? And like how quick like these words are. In fact, the speaker, one of the speakers had an awesome presentation. She's a biblical scholar and went through all the justifications in scripture that Christians should employ to be proper environmental stewards of the earth, whether that's in mining or in agriculture agriculture, and she wasn't coming after the small farmer. In fact, she's made that very clear. I'm not coming after the cattle rancher that knows all the names of his cows. I'm talking about these 10, 20,000 cattle operations. These animals are not treated with dignity and respect that God would have us give to the flock. And I was like, you are speaking specifically at Christians and you're getting through to them. I mean, I was watching like people be like, she's right. And I was like, whoa, because if I were to get up there, I would not have used so much scripture heavy language, if at all. I just would have stuck to the data. And I was like, that is wild that the politicization of language really does make a difference. That like we are being divided over this language when both of us are advocating for better and improved regulation and improvement of the treatment and respect for the lands. Like we're heading towards the same mountain peak, but we're just going different approaches to do it. And really made me start thinking about allyship and how, especially after this recent presidential election, how does the progressive left have to look at approaching coalitions differently and allyship? How can we find topics that the end goal is very similar, but maybe we're going to talk to our audiences about it in different ways?
I'm curious, Russ, you're currently running for office, and you're running in a district that's pretty evenly split as a moderate candidate. I imagine you have to you have to be a little bit careful with your language because you don't want to alienate both camps. I'd be curious to hear how you try to walk that line. And Leigh, after that, I'd be interested in hearing your reaction.
Yeah. Well, Leigh, you're speaking my language, literally, about language, because it's true. Like I've kind of framed my campaign around this man in black idea, which, my theory was bring polarization back to the middle. And some of that happens with the right language that you're talking about, which is not playing to the extremes of either side, but really talking about the things that we actually have in common. Because I think if people can, like you said, find a way to speak the same language, they'll find that they probably agree on more than they disagree on, especially here in Montana. That's quite common. Many of us were raised in similar ways, whether it be in a city environment like Missoula or Bozeman, or in a rural environment. Either way, there's this like culture around the outdoors and community preservation, and that both sides I think can identify with. So the idea of the man in black was like not wearing a red tie, not wearing a blue tie, but really representing a black tie, which is this neutrality of stop identifying as a party and identify as a person with issues that you're passionate about. And that seems to be resonating. I mean, it's hard. There is a base of people on both sides that are just like, you're not necessarily representing, everything that I stand for. And it's kind of like, well, that's the point, right? I mean, the moderate approach is finding a way to bridge the gap. And you talked a little bit about an environment, and that intrigues me too, because, as I'm sure you're aware, with some of the EPA standards rolling back, coal mine production ramping up, and these other things that we've worked hard as Montanans to get away from in terms of toxins and our environment here. I think that's an area that both sides can be like, whoa, this is not good for our rivers and our aquifers and our soils, and you name it, which affects everybody here. So just finding a way to speak that language that everyone's like, this is not a political issue, it's a people issue, and we have to find a way to talk through it together that's not left or not right. It should be a unifying matter. And so I do think that's language based. It's how you start a conversation and carry on a conversation. I was raised in a Republican household, so my parents are still identify as Republican. Their parents were Democrat. So interesting family conversations all the time, as you can imagine. But I think that's pretty common in Montana, right? Like people were slightly left or slightly right, and the broader environment is trying to pull us wider apart. So I think we need to find things that bring us back together. And I do think environment's one of those things, public land's one of those things, education should be one of those things, childcare, social security. There's a lot of things that we can talk about that are common languages that bring us together, and then we can talk more about some of the things that raises people's hair a little bit.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the luck in your political endeavors. I'm thankful. You said you're out of Missoula currently?
St. Regis. I should have been out of Missoula because I find myself driving there 3 or 4 times a week for groceries or whatever else. But here we are, It's great out. And I think even here, people think of Mineral County as being deeply red, but I launched my campaign and there was a lot of people that are just like, whoa, at first they were like, oh, you're a Democrat, no way. And it's just like, hey, just slow down, take a look at the issues. And it's like, whoa, those are not Democratic issues. Those are issues that I identify with. I'm like, exactly. It's not me versus you. It's an us thing. And that's where that better together comes from. and just getting people to slow down and look at the language. It's like, hey, we're not that different, right?
Absolutely. And it takes so much work on the leader or the campaign team, because there's the Men in Black, this awesome neutrality you're approaching. And then there's also like being able to morph your language to different groups without sacrificing the integrity of your message. For example, yesterday I went to Rotary in Great Falls and I completely redid my speech because Rotary they have what's called the 4-way test. And it's these 4 lines that they recite at the beginning of every meeting to ensure that their actions and their decisions are guided by these 4 guiding principles.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And then the 5th sometimes is it fun?
And is it fun? And I modified my speech towards that when I was talking about the clean energy fair. And again, it's more work on my part. I already had a script pulled out. I didn't need to and my script would have been fine, but it's again, knowing your audience without compromising the integrity of your message. If I had the opportunity to go speak to a church, I might pull a note from that speaker's talk at the conference and frame it that way. But like you said, Alli, early on, like the messaging and the framing is so critical. Being able to not compromise, not become inauthentic, or just start paying lip service and saying buzzwords just because you're in that audience. Like it doesn't have to be that way either. And the environment's a good one. Like you said, Montanans really care about it. Yeah,
it reminds me of like you get the people that you'll talk about social programs and they'll call you like a crazy socialist or whatever, right? But they're quick to forget, like, hey, when there's a heavy snow, all of us are really happy when that snowplow comes around, or when when there's an accident and fire trucks and ambulance show up to the rescue. Like it's just a subtle reminder, like social programs are good, and it doesn't mean you have to be a socialist country. Social, the word social comes from the base root soc, which is society. We're a community, and if we forget that, we're seeing that at a national level, right? Like this approach of like we can stand on our own. And yes, you may be able to do that, but it's much harder, right? And so if you can figure out a way to do it together, it's a much smoother pathway to a better life.
And those really are issues where you can find a lot of commonality. Just this last weekend, was it last Wednesday, they had the protests on behalf of Head Start. And I went to one here in Butte, which is a pretty democratic town. And a couple of the protesters were surprised that they were getting such a good reception. A lot of the indivisible ones, you're having trucks go by and roll coal, all that stuff, but none of that happened with the Head Start one. And they thought it was because it was all Democrats driving by. I'm like, well, no, Republicans use Head Start too. I mean,
totally.
Yeah. An integral service. My 3 oldest went to Head Start. I always say that my company, as it is now, never would have existed if I didn't have something like that available to me when I was a young father.
What do we think the value of nonverbal communication is at this point? For example, I'm not going to say I'm going to throw out what I think, and then I'll let you tell me what you think about it, if that's okay. I think there is tremendous value in a handshake. I think there is tremendous value in a face-to-face meeting where you lock eyes with people, because I think, behind a screen, you can sort of tell, but it's not the same. And I think that when you have those personal interactions, people can then get a feel from you about whether or not you're genuine about what you're talking about. And they can get a feel for who you are as a person on the inside. There's an exchange that happens there that I don't think we can have as easily or nearly at all in some cases online. And so to me, I think that there should be in the messaging, obviously the Montana Democrats need we need a lot of help, right? So I think I think to myself, I'm like, okay, so that means we got to get out and pound the pavement. We've got to be shaking hands. And even if I'm not talking about the issues every single time, that connection alone is enough that'll carry me so far, so much farther in some cases than the words that come out of my mouth. And so I would love to see all hands on deck. I would love to see all of the engaged political people who want to see change in this country, get out and start shaking your neighbor's hands, even if you don't talk about politics.
That reminds me of 2 points that we moved back here in 2021. I grew up in Montana. I left for the military in, I guess it was 2005, 2006. And they say it takes you a long time to get back to Montana once you leave. That's true. But we got back, and I think the first week we were driving, and like 3 different people gave us the old Montana wave, right? Like you don't know them, but they give you the couple fingers, not the bad ones, the good ones that are just kind of a hello, you know? And I remember both my kids and wife saying, like, do you know that person? And it's like, no, it's just how we roll here, you know, like it's part of the, especially small town mentality. But it kind of plays into that handshake thing. And that leads me to my second point, which is what I keep hearing. And I've been blessed to be able to come out strong. And a lot of people have invited me into their communities. And what people are saying is like, they just want someone who will show up and just be present. You don't have to know everything and you don't have to have all the answers, but they just want to know that you're in the fight with them and that you're willing to just like listen and hear and help problem solve. And she said, shake hands and be like, hey, yeah, we're in this together. We'll figure it out. I think that's what we're missing, honestly. Like, I'm sure there's lots of things that our representatives have done right. And of course, there's a lot of things that they've done that we probably disagree with. But the biggest, I think, misstep is not showing up for their communities and not being present. That's what people need, especially in times of big change and stress and anxiety politically. People want to know that the person that they elected has their back. And I don't think they're getting that right now. So that plays into that. I think show up, shake hands, you know, talk face to face. Virtual meetings are relatively new, right? They've happened in our lifetime. I'm technically a millennial, but I feel like I'm not, right? Like I just figured that out here recently. I'm like, oh, I guess I fall into that class. But I grew up in a time where we didn't have internet. It came on, I think, in junior high and high school, and it was dial up, and we had one computer for the full family, and it was awful, right, compared to what we have now. But couldn't pick up the house phone because it would disconnect the home internet type thing. So if you look at like how humans are programmed, I mean, we've had thousands and thousands of years of face-to-face interaction. That's how we connect with people. It's not through electronic means. And so that's what makes us feel trust and comfort and, you know, all the things that make us believe in something is in I think a person-to-person connection.
Yeah, and speaking of like online, I'm interestedly in your take on the sort of like the changing of a lot of words. Like woke is now a very bad thing, and online words change so often. Like even groomer used to mean something different, and now it's a term that's used against like the LGBT community specifically instead of what it actually means. They just kind of throw the word around and it's lost all of its meaning. How do you feel like do you think that's from the internet? Do you think it's from politics? How do you use those words to try and get your language across, or do you just skip them?
Yeah, internet lingo is its own thing. And like you said, it changes all the time. And that's one way to out your age too, is by not knowing internet lingo. But I think you're absolutely right that it changes so hard that you might think you're going one way and then you've now insulted or done something the other. The other point I wanted to make about the internet is with the politicization of language, whether it's what you're talking about, the speed of the change of language, or, you know, just how on the internet to your point, Alli, about needing face-to-face and wrestle. When we see people online and we don't have anything else to go with other than their face or like just their general, and they start using these politicized words, you start assuming like the worst extreme version of them too. Like you're like, oh, you use the word climate change, or you use, you know, whatever. And it gives the worst caricature of the other. I mean, like you'll even see it in the bios. Like a one that's going on right now is if you put the word patriot in your social media bio. I served in the military. You served in the military. Like proud patriot. But like now there's almost like this warped, like, well, what kind of patriot? And like nationalist, or just these connotations that have corrupted what these words mean, and needing to bend over backwards to explain yourself almost. That really has helped so much, Alli, when you're in person, because then it's like, oh, you can say I'm a patriot, or, you know, whatever the word is that you're trying to talk about. And because you're here in person, shaking their hand, drinking coffee with them, it's not some alien caricature on the internet, some floating head.
Well, it does seem to a certain degree that leadership on the right has done a great job at playing that word game. But on the left, there's this trend to just drop it and stay as far away from it as you possibly can. What is it? The term MAGA, make America great again. That is something that should be relatively positive association for everyone. Or, even if you are on the left or moderate and just don't like Trump, things have been kind of not great for a lot of people. I would love to see America great again. And I think a great way to do that is to get Trump out of office.
Yeah, I echo that. I'll tell you though, I think, I'll agree with you. The right is really good at branding. If we were just to look at this as like core business concepts and not politics, they're really good at that marketing branding piece. And I think Trump's a terrible businessman, don't get me wrong. But his team has branded this image that make America great again. You look at, there's dozens of different terms that they use that people get behind. And I had a great conversation in Libby last weekend with a group up there. I met with their Democratic convention there for Lincoln County, and there are a couple people that brought that up as like, hey, we need our own terms, right? Like we need someone to come up with our own 3 or 4 word like battle cry, and they weren't wrong. It's like people need something to identify with when it comes to capturing what they believe in. And I think in the last 20 years or so, Democrats have been a little bit label averse, right? Because we're afraid of offending people in some way or capturing the essence of something wrong. And it plays to the whole language conversation we were just having. By not having a language, you're almost doing more damage than trying to create a language. So I don't disagree with them. I think there's an opportunity there, but we also have to demystify the language that's used by the.
Well, I think Republicans are terrible at business, but great at branding. Democrats are great at business, but terrible, just awful at branding.
And there's so much to be said about how what Trump and the MAGA movement did was they went for the simple. When like the left or the progressive, however you want to describe, we have a tendency because of critical thinking, either through that cultivated through higher education or other opportunities. Like we'll get into the complexity, we'll get into the nuance, and we'll get into these sort of like Socratic seminars about policies and politics. And I think that's like great, awesome, glad we're thinking about it. But there's also the whole side of it that it's like, just what is happening? Just talk to me. Like, don't overcomplicate this need for things to be simple. Like the MAGA movement went, like, make America great again. And it is appealing to a lot of folks that are wanting this 1950s, 60s sort of way of life. And there's, of course, like the racial and patriarchal undertones, but there's also like this feeling of Trump is getting to this heart of this feeling of not having purpose or use or something that his voters feel like they don't have any. So again, see, now we're getting into the nuance and the complexity, but doing what I think that's really like, so, I mean, even like the phrase trickle down economics, brilliant branding term. Did it work? No, it's simple.
Let me push back just a little bit though on some of the things you guys had to say. I echo most of what you guys have to say. I agree with it, but I think one of the components of the conversation that I see that seems to be missing to me is that Republicans have co-opted language. It is not so much that they're these mavericks. It's that they've taken these simple concepts like you were talking about, and they've changed the meaning in such a way that, well, you can't, it's a real gotcha if you say you don't want America to be great. Well, it's not a gotcha because your version of great ain't great, bro. Like your version of great sucks. And it's the idea, yes, Trump is a master marketer, right? There's no doubt about it. The man has managed to get his name on literally everything at this point, I think. Everything but the bottom of my feet, where I wish it would be. But the point of the matter is when we're talking about messaging and we're talking about marketing, I don't think following the leader, so to speak, is the way to go. I don't think trying to do what they do and what they're good at doing is the right thing to do. I think, first of all, I think they talk down to their voters. They're like the free candy van of politicians, right? They offer easy, quick little candy and they lure them into the van. And it's just easy because it's so sweet and simple and easy. And I think that's wrong. I don't think we should talk down to the voters. But I also don't think we should talk over the voters, which is where I think Democrats get in trouble. We talk way over people's heads instead of just having a conversation with the person that's in front of us and letting them ask honest questions, having an honest dialogue with them. When you talked about the word patriot, when it comes to like the word patriot and the American flag, I get real passionate about that really quickly because I am a patriot and I love my country and I am absolutely disappointed to the nth degree in what's going on right now. I absolutely do not support the Trump regime and never will. But that doesn't make me unpatriotic. And because I don't wear star-spangled underwear and because I don't have a mullet or whatever the cliche is, doesn't mean I'm not patriotic. You know, when I drive around and I'm seeing American flags flying next to a Trump flag or a MAGA flag, it just pisses me off because who the hell do you think you are? You don't get to take over the meaning of the entire country. You have a place in it and you can be patriotic as well, but you don't get to tell me that I'm not because I don't agree with you. Get a little.
Alli, really quickly, I want to push back a little bit because
Okay.
I've seen your TikToks and I'm pretty sure you do have star-spangled clothing. No, they do co-opt it, but we willingly hand it over, which is frustrating.
There is this thing too where there is a unwantingness to talk about things, like even with Kamala's campaign, like I know that there are a lot of people who didn't want to vote for her because she wouldn't talk about Gaza. And so I think that yes, some of it is like what you guys have said, where we need, you know, a slogan or branding. They're not that great at it. But I think a lot of it too is that they just kind of avoid. They don't really talk about things. They just are like, yeah, and then they move on to something else and they just try to, because Russell, I think you said it, they don't want to offend anybody, but by doing that you're kind of just like alienating everybody.
Yeah, you offend everybody. You offend
Right.
here, you offend everybody. And to your point about the flags, Allison, I think that's a great point. And I've heard that is like, it's our flag too. And you're right, it is. Just because you disagree doesn't make you unpatriotic. That's the whole point of our whole democracy, is to be able to agree and disagree respectfully and move forward together, both as Americans, but with different opinions on how that should go. I see it even with the Don't Tread on Me flag. I mean, that one has been used for everything. It originated as in opposition to tyranny, and it's kind of made its way through different political sectors and, you know, libertarianism, and then had a military affiliation through 9/11, and you name it. It's again, it goes back to symbolism, and I think that plays to the language conversation. People look for a symbol or a saying that they can latch onto, and it's not just Republicans, it is Democrats too. I just think that people, honestly, if you want my honest opinion, I think it goes back to community. People want to feel a part of something, and they do a good way at branding a certain community, and people rally behind it. It's an opportunity missed, I think, for us.
I think that's a really great point, right? It's the community part. And I think one of the things that I see within that context is, this is just what I think. And this is my tragic optimism coming out. Just fair warning, it's there. I can't help but think to myself, why don't we build better communities that they can be a part of, where they don't have to make up their own lies for a guy before he's even made up his own lies about whatever it is, you know, where they can be satisfied and fulfilled and sustained and grow and gather good to themselves, instead of having to do, you know, all the dance that the Trump camp requires, that the Republicans require, you know, toe this bullshit line that's painful and that is hurting a whole lot of people, instead of being able to think for themselves. Why don't we build communities where their voice actually matters?
I think that we have melded all of these conversations so well. And it is, you know, we have had a few episodes. I think this technically will be episode 8 or 9, but it really is wild to me, as someone who is self-proclaimed politically illiterate. That is a pun on language. I'm so sorry. I'll see myself out. But I think it's crazy how so many different people, no matter your views, it all comes down to, we all are craving the same thing, and it's community. Everyone wants a community. Everyone wants to feel like they belong. And it's very unfortunate that there seems to be a group of people who their community comes from getting one over on somebody else, or this like gotcha of it all. And it's really beautiful to hear, you know, Russell, your plans on like a universal childcare. That's so beautiful. I mean, because kids are our future. I mean, there's just no way to get around that. Whether you have children or not, it really comes down to how these children are educated. It is going to shape the world. And I mean, even Leigh, with the conversation about language, I mean, that is literally how we all communicate, whether it's verbally or non-verbally, like Alli brought up. There's so many different things, and it all really just comes back to community. And I think that if we can kind of take out just if we can kind of push all of the other aside and realize that the thing that everybody wants is just community, I think we could just do something, can't we?
Yeah, and to your point, I think, issues like this, I'll say they're nonpartisan. They should be nonpartisan or bipartisan. There'll be people that try and make them partisan or paint them one way or the other. But I don't care if you're the guy that chooses not to have kids and is, relatively wealthy and cares most about how your stock market is doing. Guess what? Your stocks do a lot better when you have a booming economy and a strong workforce. It's the same thing. Like you said, it affects everybody. And to your point, the political language, I've already been pointed out this, like, what's your political history? I'm like, I don't have one. The point is, we need to stop leaning on that just because I haven't been a lifelong politician, at the end of the day, I'm a problem solver. And I would rather have a problem solver in office fighting my fight than a politician that doesn't really care about the problems. So I think we need to get back to that. Someone that cares about community, someone that cares about solving real problems that affect us all. And once we figure that out, I think we'll start bridging that gap that you were talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. These were beautiful conversations. I think that there are going to be people who get a lot out of these. So thank you guys so much. If you want to give your socials or links or websites or anything that you want where people can find you, that would be great. Russell, we'll start with you and then we'll move on to Leigh.
Yeah, and you can find me on Instagram at Cleveland for Congress 26, and on Facebook, just Cleveland for Congress is my page, or you can look me up, Meta Verified at Russell Cleveland. Hope to see you there.
What's your website and how can people donate?
Website is russellcleveland.org, and I have a Join the Movement tab on there where you can donate through ActBlue or just straight through the website itself. So I will do a quick pitch that, I'm a grassroots campaign, and so in order for this ship to keep steamrolling down the road, I'm going to be dependent on Montanans and ordinary folks like us to contribute what they can to help keep fighting the good fight here. So I appreciate any support you all could give.
Russell, it's been so fantastic listening to you. I'm so excited for Montana's future. I wish you nothing but the most support. Let me know how I can help you in Great Falls. Absolutely. My name is Leigh Larson. Leigh is spelled Leigh. And speaking of puns, my social media handles on everything are follow the leader on that Substack, YouTube, and TikTok, Instagram. So follow the LEIGHDER. I speak primarily on theology, history, politics, the environment. I also, same website, followtheleader.com. I am a children's book author. I write books about my dog, Professor Huckleberry, as he narrates national park adventures around the country. And I read to schools and whatnot. More than happy to come and read to schools around Montana, especially to listeners. Tell your libraries, tell your schools. And I look forward to seeing y'all on social media. Again, that's Substack, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram at Follow the Leader, LEIGHDER.
This was amazing, and I will have links to everything. We will have a link for Russell's donations. We will have a link, Leigh, to your books. That's amazing. I want to go look at them immediately when we get off this. But yes, please check the description for all of those and follow them everywhere. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Yeah, Russell, Leigh, thank you for coming on. We'd love to have you back sometime.
Absolutely. We will see you in a week with just us, I think. I don't know. We'll find out. Anyway, bye.
Bye.